In every neighborhood, there are people who make you feel welcome, who smile when they see you, and who understand the essence of community. But then there are others, people who, no matter how much you try to respect their space, seem to make it their life's mission to create tension. For Hannah, a young girl who had never known a world without challenges, it was a constant struggle to simply exist in a place that was supposed to feel safe. Hannah was born with a disability that affected her mobility, yet her spirit was unbreakable. She found joy in the little things, the scent of flowers, the laughter of friends, and the warmth of the sun on her face. But not everyone in the neighborhood appreciated her innocence, especially not one particular woman, whom we had come to know as Karen. Karen wasn't like the other neighbors. While most were content to wave from across the street, Karen was different. She didn't just mind her own business. She made it her duty to interfere, to assert control over things that were none of her concern. From the start, there was an unspoken tension between us and her, one that escalated as the days passed. It began with trivial complaints, ones that anyone would dismiss as unimportant. Hannah, unable to walk the way others could, often used her wheelchair to get around, enjoying the freedom it offered her. Yet, whenever she ventured near Karen's lawn, Karen would appear, eyes narrowed, words sharp. "Stay off my property," she'd say, as if the sidewalk in front of her house belonged only to her. At first, it was easy to dismiss these complaints as the eccentricities of an overly territorial neighbor. After all, Hannah had been navigating the world around her with grace and determination for years. She had grown accustomed to people staring, to whispers and judgments that came her way. But this was different. Karen wasn't just rude, she was hostile. It wasn't enough for her to ask Hannah to move on. No, she went further. She'd shout at her, belittle her, and make it clear that Hannah's very presence disturbed her. Hannah didn't understand it. She couldn't comprehend why this woman, whom she had never wronged, had so much hate toward her. To her, the world was a place of possibilities, not barriers. Yet Karen's actions were creating walls around her. There was always something unsettling about Karen's eyes. They weren't just cold, they were calculating, as if she could see deep into Hannah's soul and found it wanting. Hannah's innocent smile, her soft laugh, and her wheelchair were somehow seen as threats in Karen's twisted view. It wasn't just that Karen wanted Hannah to stay away from her lawn. She wanted her to stay away from her life, her existence. And so, each day became a battle of wills between a disabled child who only wanted to explore and a woman who refused to let her be. The tension reached a boiling point one fateful afternoon. Hannah, as usual, was simply wheeling herself near the edge of the yard, gazing at the flowers she loved so much. She wasn't on Karen's lawn, yet it didn't matter. Karen's disdain had built to something more, something darker. That afternoon, she saw Hannah again, and for reasons no one would ever understand, she decided that this time, something had to be done. In the blink of an eye, Karen did what no one expected. What could drive a person to harm a disabled child? What kind of hatred would push someone to violence over something as trivial as a flower on their lawn? The attack came suddenly, and it was unprovoked. Hannah, the child who had never known malice, was violently struck. The world seemed to stop, and everything that once seemed so safe and normal felt like it had been ripped away in an instant. This wasn't just an act of aggression. It was an act of cruelty, of hatred that had festered for too long. The question that loomed in the air was simple yet profound. What would make someone do this? What kind of twisted logic could justify hurting someone who couldn't defend herself simply for existing in a space that wasn't even theirs to control? As the events unfolded, it became clear that Karen's actions were far more than a momentary lapse in judgment. They were part of something deeper, a growing obsession, a need for control that had gone too far. The violence that had erupted that day was not just physical, it was emotional and psychological, leaving scars that would take far longer to heal. And as Hannah lay there, unable to understand what had just happened, it became clear that this was not just about a lawn. It was about power, control, and the abuse of both. But more than that, it was about someone who had chosen to harm the innocent and in doing so had shown the world just how dangerous hatred can be when left unchecked. The question now isn't just how to heal from this, but how to seek justice. Hannah was just a child who had done nothing wrong except be in the wrong place at the wrong time. But how do you fight someone who's willing to hurt you just because you exist? How do you protect your family when the very systems that are supposed to keep you safe seem unable to do so? This story is about a fight for justice for a child who deserves so much more than to be a victim of someone else's cruelty. It's about Hannah, about us, and about standing up when the world tells us to stay down. The days following the attack were filled with confusion, anger, and a sense of helplessness. Hannah had always been a resilient soul, but the aftermath of that day shattered her sense of safety. The hospital visit was just the beginning. As doctors tended to Hannah's physical wounds, they could do little for the emotional damage. We, as a family, could only watch as Hannah retreated further into herself, the events haunting her in ways we couldn't yet fully understand. She had always seen the world through a lens of kindness, never knowing the depths of hatred that could exist in someone's heart. But now that innocence was gone, replaced by a constant fear and a growing distrust of the very place that had once felt like home. Meanwhile, Karen remained unrepentant, her actions becoming even more audacious. Initially, she had tried to justify her behavior, claiming that Hannah was provoking her by being too close to her lawn, an utterly absurd accusation considering the fact that Hannah had been on the sidewalk nowhere near Karen's property line. The more she spoke, the more she revealed the depth of her disdain, as if she believed she had the right to dictate who could be in the neighborhood and who couldn't. Every conversation with her was a reminder that some people, no matter their background or status, just couldn't see beyond their own narrow worldview. Karen wasn't just a neighbor, she was a force of hostility and control, someone who felt entitled to impose her will on others. It soon became apparent that this wasn't just a one-off incident. Hannah's wheelchair, which had once symbolized her ability to move and explore the world, had now become a target. Karen didn't see a disabled child who deserved love and care. She saw a threat. The wheelchair, which represented Hannah's journey toward independence, became the focal point of Karen's aggression. To her, it wasn't just an object that helped Hannah navigate the world. It was a symbol of something that broke her warped perception of the world. Karen viewed the very presence of a disabled child as an affront to her own sense of superiority and control. For weeks, Hannah and our family tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. We continued with our daily routines, but the weight of Karen's hatred lingered, casting a long shadow over every moment. Hannah was no longer able to go outside and enjoy the simple pleasures she once had. She had been forced to retreat into the safety of our home, her wheelchair now an object of shame rather than pride. It was as if Karen had succeeded in taking away Hannah's joy, turning something as simple as a walk down the street into an act of defiance. But the situation grew even worse. Karen's hostility didn't stop at our front door. It spread like wildfire throughout the neighborhood. She began rallying others in the community, painting our family as troublemakers. Slowly but surely, the people we once called neighbors began to distance themselves, influenced by Karen's manipulation and relentless gossip. Hannah's presence, once seen as a harmless part of the neighborhood's fabric, became an issue in Karen's twisted narrative. We were no longer just victims of Karen's cruelty, we were outsiders, unwanted in a place that had once been our home. As the conflict between our family and Karen escalated, the emotional toll was felt by all of us. Hannah became withdrawn, her confidence shattered. Every time she wheeled herself down the street, she looked over her shoulder, expecting to see Karen lurking nearby. The world she had once navigated with a sense of curiosity had turned into a minefield, filled with hidden dangers and threats. Meanwhile, Karen seemed to thrive on the chaos she had created. It was as if she fed off the fear and anger that she stirred up in the community. Her power came from her ability to control the narrative, to make others believe that she was in the right, even when her actions spoke otherwise. For us, it was clear that this wasn't just a matter of a bad neighbor. It was a matter of standing up for what was right, of protecting Hannah from a woman who saw her as nothing more than an inconvenience. But how do you fight someone who has manipulated an entire community into believing her lies? How do you stand up against someone who has the power to turn your life upside down with a few malicious words? The pressure was mounting, and the choice became clear: we had to take action. But what action could we take against a woman who had entrenched herself so deeply in the fabric of the neighborhood? Could we find a way to expose her for what she truly was, a bully and a coward hiding behind a facade of authority? The truth was that Karen's cruelty had reached a tipping point. It was no longer just about her personal dislike of Hannah. It was about something far deeper, about power, control, and the abuse of both. We had to find a way to reclaim our lives, to show the world that Hannah was not a victim, but a child who deserved to be loved and accepted just like anyone else. But how? Where did we even begin to fight back against someone who had woven herself into the fabric of the very community that was supposed to protect us? It was time for us to act, but it wasn't just about confronting Karen. It was about confronting the entire system that allowed people like her to thrive. The tipping point came unexpectedly, in a moment that would change everything for Hannah and our family. For weeks, we had lived in constant tension, walking on eggshells every time we stepped outside. Hannah, once so eager to explore the world, now hesitated at every turn, unsure of when the next confrontation would arise. Despite the ongoing conflict, we had tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, taking walks, enjoying the local park, doing the things that Hannah loved. But the stress was mounting, and the threat of violence was always there, lurking in the background, waiting to erupt. That fateful afternoon started like any other. Hannah had decided to take a short walk, accompanied by her caretaker, just to feel the fresh air and experience a few moments of peace. It had become routine to see her wheeling herself down the sidewalk, her eyes bright with curiosity, the gentle hum of her wheelchair providing a comforting rhythm to the otherwise quiet neighborhood. Karen had been lurking in her yard all morning, as she often did, keeping a watchful eye on the street. Hannah, unaware of the storm that was about to break, simply continued her journey, moving cautiously but confidently toward the edge of Karen's property line. The moment Karen saw Hannah, everything changed. She came storming out of her house, her face contorted with rage, her eyes cold and unblinking. There was something about the way she approached Hannah that sent a shiver down my spine. It was the look in her eyes. This wasn't just anger, it was something deeper, something more dangerous. It was as if she had reached the point of no return, where reason and empathy had long been abandoned in favor of pure, unadulterated cruelty. "Stay off my lawn," Karen yelled, her voice cutting through the quiet afternoon. She stood at the edge of her yard, her posture stiff and threatening. But Hannah, who had long since learned to ignore Karen's aggressive outbursts, continued moving forward, trying to stay calm. Hannah had never done anything to provoke this woman. All she wanted was to enjoy a moment of freedom, to live her life as she saw fit. It was hard to comprehend why Karen was so intent on making her feel unwelcome. But we had all learned by now that Karen saw everything as a threat, even the most innocent things. It wasn't enough for Karen to merely shout. As Hannah got closer to the edge of the property, the situation escalated in an instant. In one swift movement, Karen lunged forward, her hands gripping Hannah's wheelchair. There was a sharp, violent shove, and suddenly Hannah was sent tumbling to the ground. The wheelchair, which had always been her companion, her tool for independence, became the weapon used against her. Karen, in her fury, had violently pushed Hannah, causing her to lose control and crash hard onto the concrete sidewalk. I couldn't believe what I had just seen. For a moment, everything around me seemed to slow down as I watched Hannah struggle to regain her bearings. Her wheelchair had toppled, and she lay there, stunned and vulnerable. My heart sank. This wasn't just an act of aggression, it was an act of hate. Karen had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. "What do you think you're doing, you freak?" Karen spat, her words filled with venom. "You don't belong here. This is my property, and I won't let you ruin it." Hannah, shaken and frightened, tried to collect herself, her trembling hands reaching out for the fallen wheelchair. She had done nothing to deserve this, nothing except existing. The injustice of it all was suffocating. Karen's words stung, but it was the violence that cut deepest. My blood boiled, and in that moment, I felt a rush of protectiveness and rage. How could someone be so cruel to a defenseless child? Karen stood over Hannah, her eyes cold and unyielding. There was no remorse in her expression, no sign of guilt. She had done exactly what she had set out to do: push Hannah down, break her spirit, and remind us all that in her twisted world, power was the only thing that mattered. It was a moment of pure evil. In that instant, Karen wasn't just a neighbor, she was a predator. And Hannah, for no reason other than her disability, had become her target. I rushed to Hannah's side, lifting her carefully and checking for injuries. She was bruised, her arms scraped from the rough fall. But more than that, she was hurt in ways that went beyond the physical. Her trust in the world had been shattered. The fear in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. She had been attacked, not just by a woman, but by the very hate that had festered inside Karen for so long. The moment Karen walked away, satisfied with her cruelty, I felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness. Hannah didn't deserve this. No one did. I knew then that this would be the turning point. We could no longer sit back and allow Karen to dictate our lives. It was time to act. It was time to fight back, not just for Hannah, but for the truth. We would not let this injustice go unanswered. We would not allow Karen to get away with the harm she had caused. But the path ahead was not clear, and the fight was going to be harder than we could ever have imagined. From this point forward, there would be no more silence. This wasn't just about a neighborhood dispute anymore. It was about justice. And Hannah would not be a victim. She would be the catalyst for change. In the days following the incident, the world felt as though it had shifted beneath our feet. What had once been a peaceful neighborhood, full of familiar faces and routine interactions, now felt alien and cold. Hannah, our strong, vibrant girl, was no longer the same. The shock of the attack had left an indelible mark on her, one that went far deeper than the visible bruises on her arms and legs. It was the emotional scar that haunted her every step. The girl who once loved to explore her surroundings, to laugh and play with her friends, now avoided even the slightest hint of confrontation. The wheelchair that had been her symbol of independence became, in her eyes, a symbol of vulnerability, a constant reminder of the violence she had endured. We tried to reassure her, to remind her of the strength she possessed, but the truth was that we were all struggling. How do you reassure a child that the world is still a safe place when it has so clearly shown her otherwise? How do you protect them from the darkness when the very person who has hurt them is still out there, waiting to strike again? Every day felt like an emotional battle. Hannah would sit by the window, staring out at the street, her eyes searching for signs of Karen. The anxiety was palpable, hanging in the air like a heavy fog. She refused to go outside, even when we encouraged her to. The joy that once filled her every moment had been replaced by a deep, pervasive fear. We tried to be patient, but the pain was evident both in Hannah's eyes and in our own hearts. How could we help her move past this? How could we make her believe again in the world's goodness when it had shown her its cruelty? Meanwhile, Karen's presence in the neighborhood became even more unbearable. Her actions didn't stop at the attack, they had escalated. She had become a master manipulator, turning the narrative in her favor with each passing day. Hannah was no longer just a victim of her cruelty. She was now a target of a community that had been poisoned by Karen's lies. She painted herself as the victim, as someone who was defending her property from the so-called intruder that was Hannah. And the worst part? It was working. Slowly but surely, the neighbors who once greeted us with friendly waves now avoided eye contact, their smiles gone, replaced with awkward silences. Karen had managed to twist the situation so effectively that even those who had witnessed the attack stood in quiet agreement with her. We began to hear whispers in the community, little murmurs of doubt about our family. Some claimed that Hannah had been in the wrong, that she had provoked Karen by being too close to her lawn. It was infuriating to hear these rumors. Hannah had done nothing wrong. She had been simply enjoying her day, as any child should, but Karen's ability to manipulate and deceive was stronger than any of us could have anticipated. The emotional toll was crushing. Hannah retreated further into herself, rarely speaking to anyone outside our immediate family. She became increasingly withdrawn, finding solace in the quiet corners of her home. She no longer had the same excitement for the things that once brought her joy. There was no more fascination with the flowers in the garden, no more eagerness to roll down the sidewalk. The world that had once been her playground was now a terrifying place full of potential threats. Her wheelchair, which had been a tool of independence and mobility, now seemed to symbolize something far darker, something that had been used to harm her. But we knew we couldn't let this define her. We couldn't allow Hannah to lose her spark, her spirit. It was hard, but we had to find a way to help her heal, to show her that the world could still be a place of beauty and safety even after such an awful betrayal. We began reaching out for help. Therapy sessions, both for Hannah and for us as a family, became a regular part of our routine. Hannah had a difficult time opening up at first, but slowly, with patience and understanding, she started to talk about what had happened. It wasn't easy, and some days were harder than others, but we could see the slightest glimmer of progress. She had been through so much, and it was going to take time to rebuild what Karen had destroyed. But we were determined to help her find her way back. The pain didn't just affect Hannah, it affected all of us. As parents, we felt a deep sense of guilt, as if we had failed to protect our child from the cruelty of the world. But we couldn't afford to wallow in that guilt. We had to fight back. Hannah needed us now more than ever, and we couldn't let her down. As for Karen, she remained as cruel and unrepentant as ever. Her actions, though disgusting, were beginning to spark a sense of determination in us. This wasn't just about the physical harm done to Hannah. This was about the deeper emotional scars that Karen had inflicted on our family. We had been pushed to the brink, but we refused to let Karen win. We were going to fight, not just for Hannah, but for every child who had ever been bullied or harmed by someone like her. The legal system would soon become our battleground. The battle for justice was far from over, and we knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. But we were ready. We had to be. For Hannah, for the family we were fighting to protect, and for the truth that needed to be heard. As the days went on, we began to realize that this wasn't just a story of a disabled child being hurt by a cruel neighbor. This was the story of a family standing up to injustice, of a community's voice being heard, and of the strength it takes to rise from the ashes of tragedy. Hannah might have been knocked down, but she wasn't out, and with each passing day, we would stand by her side, helping her rebuild the life that Karen had tried so hard to tear apart. The path to justice was never going to be easy. The emotional scars left on Hannah were deep, but it was the legal battle that loomed in front of us like an insurmountable mountain. Karen had caused more than just physical harm. Her actions had planted seeds of doubt in the minds of those around us, and now we had to navigate a world that seemed increasingly hostile. The question was no longer just about getting Hannah the help she needed. It was about holding Karen accountable for the pain and suffering she had inflicted. As we began to pursue legal action, we quickly realized that the fight would be far from straightforward. We had to gather evidence, testimonies, and all the support we could muster. The idea of rehashing the traumatic incident in front of a courtroom was difficult for Hannah, who was already struggling with the emotional weight of what had happened. But we knew that the truth had to come out. We couldn't let Karen walk away from this, unpunished, with the ability to hurt others in the future. We enlisted the help of a strong legal team, one that believed in Hannah's case and understood the importance of what we were trying to do. From the start, they made it clear that the case wasn't just about compensating for damages. It was about ensuring Karen could never hurt another person again. They worked tirelessly, piecing together everything from the witness statements to photographs of Hannah's injuries, including the scars that were more than just skin deep. But the legal system was a slow-moving machine, and it was easy to feel as though we were up against a wall. Every step forward seemed to come with 2 steps back. As we submitted evidence and filed motions, Karen continued to manipulate the narrative, creating more doubt and confusion. Her lawyer, slick and unyielding, used every trick in the book to discredit our family and make it seem as though Hannah had been the one at fault. She was playing dirty, and every courtroom appearance left us feeling more frustrated, more helpless. Despite the setbacks, we refused to back down. The more we fought, the more we realized just how deeply Karen's actions had affected the entire community. People we once considered friends now whispered behind our backs, and the stain of doubt she had cast over our family grew larger by the day. But that only made us more determined to press on. This wasn't just about getting Hannah justice. It was about showing the world that even the most powerful, manipulative people couldn't get away with cruelty. We also knew that Hannah's healing wasn't just about the courtroom. It was about the love and support she received from those who stood by her side. The therapy sessions continued, and slowly but surely, she began to regain the confidence that had been stripped away from her. There were still moments when she would wake up in the middle of the night, trembling, or when she'd avoid leaving the house, but the progress was undeniable. She was fighting for herself, and in that fight, she had the entire family behind her. Meanwhile, Karen grew bolder in her actions, trying to turn more of the community against us. She spread rumors, told lies, and tried to paint herself as the wronged party. But every time she spoke, we grew stronger. Every falsehood she told only brought us closer to the truth. Karen had underestimated us, and her hubris would be her downfall. The court case dragged on for months. The legal back and forth was exhausting, and there were days when we felt as though we were fighting a battle we couldn't win. But we continued, driven by the knowledge that Hannah deserved better. We couldn't let Karen's cruelty be rewarded by the silence of the justice system. We couldn't allow her to walk away unscathed, knowing she had hurt our family so deeply. And then the breakthrough came. After a particularly grueling deposition, one in which Karen had been caught in several lies, the tide began to turn. The truth, undeniable and clear, began to shine through the cracks she had created. The community, too, started to see through her manipulations. Slowly but surely, support for Hannah and our family began to grow. It wasn't just about our fight anymore. It was about exposing the truth for everyone to see. The day the verdict was handed down, we felt a mixture of relief and triumph. Karen was found guilty of battery, and the court ruled in favor of Hannah. Karen would be held accountable for her actions. But it wasn't just about the legal victory. It was about the message it sent about standing up for what was right no matter how hard the fight was. Hannah's victory wasn't just a personal one. It was a victory for every person who had ever been bullied, misunderstood, or hurt. It was a victory for justice. As for Karen, the legal consequences were just the beginning. The community, finally seeing her for who she truly was, distanced themselves from her. The lies she had spun for so long no longer had any power. Hannah was no longer the victim of Karen's cruelty. She had become a symbol of resilience, of standing tall in the face of injustice, and emerging stronger on the other side. The legal battle was over, but the emotional recovery was just beginning. Hannah would never forget what happened, none of us would, but we had won. We had stood up to a bully, and we had proven that even in the darkest times, truth and justice can prevail. Hannah was healing slowly but surely, and with every passing day, she reclaimed the pieces of herself that Karen had tried to take. We knew that the road ahead would be challenging, but we also knew that together we could face anything. The fight had been long, but it had been worth it. And Hannah, the girl who had been pushed to the ground, was now the girl who stood tall, stronger, braver, and more determined than ever before. The months that followed the legal battle were filled with healing, reflection, and a growing sense of closure. Hannah had won her fight for justice, but the journey toward emotional recovery was a far more complex one. The scars, both visible and invisible, would take time to heal, But each day brought us closer to a sense of peace. As Hannah began to regain her confidence, she showed the world the strength that had always been within her. It was a quiet strength, a resilience that came not from fighting back with anger, but from standing tall in the face of adversity and choosing to rise above it. The healing process wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight. There were still moments of fear, of hesitation, when Hannah would retreat into herself, unsure of the world around her. But what amazed us most was how, time and time again, she found the courage to push forward. With the support of her family, her therapy sessions, and the growing network of friends who stood by her, Hannah began to rebuild her life. She started going outside again, rolling her wheelchair down the same sidewalk where her world had been shattered. This time, though, she did so with a sense of pride, with a deep understanding that she had overcome something unimaginable. As for the neighborhood, things began to change. The community, which had once been divided and influenced by Karen's lies, slowly started to rebuild its trust in us. People who had once distanced themselves began reaching out, offering their support, their apologies for not standing up sooner. It wasn't easy for everyone to admit they had been misled, but over time, they came to see the truth. Karen had manipulated them, just as she had manipulated the legal system, but the truth had a way of shining through, no matter how long it took. Slowly but surely, we began to rebuild the relationships that had been damaged by Karen's toxicity. Karen, on the other hand, was left to face the consequences of her actions. The court ruling had stripped her of her power in the neighborhood, and she was no longer able to influence people's perceptions with her lies. The once feared figure in the community was now a pariah, and her isolation only deepened as her lies unraveled. No longer able to hide behind her manipulations, she found herself increasingly alone. The truth had finally caught up with her, and the walls she had built around herself crumbled. But despite her punishment, it was clear that Karen would never truly understand the damage she had caused. Her inability to empathize, to feel genuine remorse, would ensure that she never truly faced the emotional consequences of her actions. For Hannah and our family, however, the sense of relief was palpable. The victory in the courtroom had been important, but it was the healing of Hannah's spirit that meant the most. The courage she had shown in the face of Karen's cruelty was awe-inspiring, and it served as a constant reminder to all of us that strength isn't always about physical power. It's about the ability to endure, to rise above, and to keep moving forward, even when the world seems determined to hold you back. As Hannah began to thrive once again, it became clear that this experience, no matter how painful, had shaped her into someone stronger, someone more compassionate, and someone who would never again let fear dictate her life. She had learned to advocate for herself, to stand her ground, and to trust that the world could still be a place of goodness despite the wrong she had faced. And as for us, her family, we knew that this was not the end, but the beginning of a new chapter. We had fought for Hannah, but in the process, we had fought for ourselves too. We had stood up against injustice, and in doing so, we had proven that love, family, and courage could overcome even the most trying of circumstances. The wounds may never fully disappear, but they would no longer define us. We had emerged from the storm stronger, with a renewed sense of purpose, and with the knowledge that together we could face anything. In the end, it wasn't just about seeking revenge or punishing Karen for her actions. It was about standing firm in the face of adversity and reclaiming our power. It was about showing Hannah that the world was still a place where kindness, love, and justice could prevail. And as we looked toward the future, we knew that Hannah had learned the most important lesson of all, that no matter how cruel or unjust the world may seem, there is always hope, and there is always a way to heal. We had fought for justice, and we had found it. If Hannah's story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to HOA Denied Access for more powerful and emotional stories about standing up to injustice. Your support means the world to us, and we promise to keep bringing you stories that inspire, engage, and remind us all of the strength that lies within. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. Thank you for being part of our journey.